2014 regular meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education. Sandy, will you please call the roll?
Albright.
Here.
Belville. Here. Benford. Here. Fuqua. Marquez.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Reed.
Here.
Great. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It is the mission of the Boulder Valley School District to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives that I will remember as we're going through this day today. I would like, the next item of business is the superintendent's report. Bruce, messenger.
Good evening, President Albright, members of the board. Welcome this evening. So I have a few items. The first item I'd like to address relates to work we're doing with the legislature. This week, the Denver Area School Superintendent's Council put out a proposal on a school funding proposal that we distributed to all superintendents throughout the state and asked them to indicate their level of support for this proposal. The origin of this really was work that we started in the fall and convened superintendents from across the state in early January to have conversation about needs of schools. And so what we proposed after much deliberation was that we believe the most appropriate way to address the shortfall of funding in schools is through the restoration of the dollars that were taken away during the recession, which is commonly referred to as the negative factor. The negative factor difference between what we actually receive in schools and the amount that we should be receiving under Amendment 23 is about $1.2 billion. And so what this proposal calls for is a restoration of, not all of that, but $275 million of additional money that would be above and beyond what the governor has proposed, that the governor's staff has presented to the Joint Budget Committee. So this $275 million we're proposing would be reoccurring dollars. There's quite a bit of talk right now early in the session about one-time dollars. We know about one-time dollars. We use them ourselves from time to time. But for reoccurring costs to commit one-time dollars, we don't believe makes sense, especially given the needs of schools across the state. So we've worked hard to reach out to large districts, small districts, mountain communities, Eastern Plains and the Western Slope, really to see what would work best for them. So we will know by midday tomorrow what the level of support is among superintendents across the state, and we think probably reflect districts as well. This proposal is very consistent with what the Colorado Association of School Boards is recommending, and that's to buy down the negative factor or restore the funding to schools, and also the Colorado Education Association and other education partners, including the Colorado Association of School Executives. So I just want to share that with you. I will just tell you this is not receiving a lot of positive support among legislators. They would prefer to see the money come in different ways. We've had conversation with Senator Johnston and Representative Hamner. They have a proposal they have developed that would infuse upwards of $250 million more in public schools, but packaged differently, and a portion of that would be one-time money. There are portions of that legislation they're working on that we probably wouldn't disagree with. However, we believe some of those things really need to follow the restoration of funds to get to an adequate level of funding. So kind of first things first. And also in this proposal of the $275 million being proposed, a recognition that we believe most of that should go down to buy the negative factor, but that some of it could be dedicated towards our students who are most at risk. And rather than prescribing what we think that should be, we've certainly had a lot of conversation around it, but we understand the legislators also have some thoughts around, how that might be used to target children who are in poverty, children in English language learning, special education. So we'll see where this goes. But I think it'll be really important as we make our way into this session that there be a strong voice from school districts, board members, administration, teachers, parents, and others the value of restoring the funds to the schools. As we look at what's unfolded in this session and the amount of money that's in the state education fund, restoration of other program areas since the recession has been incorporated in the governor's proposed budget, but not restoration of funds to K-12 public education. So we just think that declaration needs to be made, and so we're making it. So anyway, I'd be glad to answer questions about that. I will keep you informed as we receive information. Again, we have a lot of connections with our education partners, and we've kept them well informed of where this goes. This is probably the first time the superintendents have organized themselves and have come together with a collective shared voice, and we think there's a place for that, and we hope it has some influence. I would also just say, in my other role as co-chair of the legislative committee for the school administrators, is that we've begun to take stands on bills that are calling for more resources that would support K-12 schools. And again, not that these ideas are bad, but that's the same resource that we're trying to get restored to the schools. So every dollar we take out of the education fund or the general fund to do another program or another service is just that dollar that's not available for restoring the negative factor. So that's kind of been our position at the start of the session. The other thing I would mention is last week the Impact Board of Directors had their annual half-day gathering and where they do some visioning and planning. And so it was a great session and very productive. And they identified some things they'd like to continue to work on and some areas they would probably like to visit in the future. We have principals who are on the board of directors representing different levels in schools, and we have leadership of the Teachers Association, other employees, along with community members. And so we feel appreciative to be included in that group, and it feels like a real partnership. It is a real partnership. So, and then in March, that we'll have some of our own employees recognized through the Impact on Education's awards evening, which will be at the Boulder Theater. So I think you've gotten an invitation to that, as Sandy's communicated with you on that. So that'll be a fun evening of celebration for staff members. The other thing is that I want to return to just a little bit of conversation to our work around flood recovery. I know that now that seems months ago, and it has been, and we've healed a lot from that. But one of the things I just wanted to mention is the STAR grant, which is a grant we received along with other forms of support. The STAR grant was one that we applied through the Colorado Department of Education, which came out of the U.S. Department of Education. Congressman Polis and others were very helpful, Robert Hammond, in helping us secure these funds. We were the largest recipient of all school districts. Of the 700 and some thousand, we received over 300,000 of that. So I just wanted to mention that that money is being expended right now. So I thought you might just like to know some of the work that's going on. We're working on a summary report that will touch on all these funding sources, but this is one that we're working on right now. So we've been able to provide tutoring for students that were impacted educationally when they were relocated or dislocated. We've placed some additional support up in the Jamestown Mountain School that's at the Glacier View Ranch campground, and we've been able to reinvest dollars to cover some of our cost initially with that, and so that's really been a positive thing. One of the things that has come up, just like we just put on 2 counselors that will work with students and families for children and families who were displaced, and so some of the emotional impact of that's being felt now as students are either not in their home school or in another location, like half of Jamestown students are at Community Montessori, which has been a wonderful experience for them, but they're not in their home, and it's not their same setting, although they do have one of the teachers. So a lot of efforts going into to normalize that as best we can and help them, all the children, as they transition back in. And we've also invested in technology to support some outside of the day learning for those students as well. So that's been a really positive thing, and we really do appreciate that financial support as we've worked with students. Then my final comment would be we are doing consensus training this week, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at the Professional Development Center in this building. You'd be welcome to drop by anytime. As you know, Bob Chadwick is not going to be here because he's recovering from surgery that he had a week ago, and that he's doing well. So Diane, who will be with us, and also another associate will be joining Diane. So we have, I think, 8 schools, 65 or so educators and others who will be at the training. So feel free to drop by. I think we start at 8 tomorrow morning and go through late day all 3 days. So just drop in anytime. we are now to the point that some of our staff who have been in training or bargained with us are now getting a role of responsibility to help with the facilitation so that we can continue to build capacity of being able to do this. I mean, we love having our consultants come in and work with us, our facilitators, but we also want to build that capacity ourselves. So they had a meeting this afternoon in advance in preparation of that. So anyway, we're pleased about that. And this was we postponed the September training because of the floods, and so we really have kind of two back-to-back. We have one here at the end of January, then we'll have another 3 days with 8 additional schools at the end of February. So those will be the 2 we do this year. So if you can't make it this week, we'll get you those dates at the end of February as well, and maybe you can drop by. So anyway, that concludes my report. President Albright, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions about the report? Sure, Shelley.
What exactly do you want the state to do with the state education fund? If you don't want them to use it for programs, if you want it to all go towards this negative factor right now, even though it wouldn't be recurring money? I'm just trying to understand how that would work.
So I think that, so what I understand is there's over $1 billion in the state education fund, and they want to have a balance of, well, I've heard anywhere between $400,000 and $700,000. So obviously there's some money that's available. It restores itself automatically. So it is one-time money, but it's not really one-time money. So, it's fill the bucket up, empty it back out. So it wouldn't be inappropriate to use some of it for one-time expenditures. I think that what we're encouraging is that they invest those dollars now with an understanding that those will replenish. And the other is that as the state makes obligations to restoring other areas, then those are ongoing dollars that could be used to restore K-12 education. In the governor's proposed budget, it's about $1 billion off of where we would have been as a state budget had we not had the recession. It's about $1 billion off with growth that would have occurred during that time, which is exactly the same amount of money that K-12 education is down. So another way to look at that is basically everything at the end of this session will have been restored, with the exception of K-12 education, if we don't make an additional investment beyond what's being proposed by the governor's office. So, so part of the push around this $275 million or whatever amount it turns out to be is it may mean that we need to make some other adjustments in the state budget to be able to begin to restore the funding to K-12 education. So I think the state education fund can be a part of that solution. As we know, they have earmarked some of that money to go places unrelated to education as well. So and there are requests for some of those dollars to be used for non-educational purposes also.
But I thought that was the requirement of the fund, that it not be used for anything non-educational. Is that not true?
Well, I mean, I think that's within the discretion of the legislature. So, I mean, it's not, this year it hasn't, because obviously no decisions have been made. So some of the conversation we're in is the March forecast to see, where the state's economy is, which makes sense. That we hope that all of these requests for fundings are held up until such time as, we know where we are financially. So it's trying to get a foot in the door. I mean, one of the challenges we have is proposed additional investments is that, so as supportive as we are of full-day kindergarten here, many of us, the reality is the dollars allocated for full-day kindergarten will all be used to hire kindergarten teachers, which is a great thing. So it doesn't really help us restore the money that we need for other programs that were lost during the recession. So, I mean, that in addition to what we're proposing would probably be well accepted. But the reality is it doesn't put money in districts that they have discretion to use for other needs. So that would be one example. Or expanding program for services that the state dictates where those dollars go. Again, not a bad thing, but that doesn't give us any additional money to put our literacy program back in or address class size or whatever else our priorities are.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Jim?
So thank you. Is DASK or anybody out there kind of talking about litigating Amendment 23 and testing whether the Attorney General's opinion is actually valid in court?
Yes, there's active conversation around that challenge. In fact, preparation is being done at this time. So I think the governor will have the opportunity to engage in that conversation, legislative leadership, I'm assuming, as well. So yes, there's active conversation around that.
All right, thanks.
Any other comments about this topic that, because I have one. And Shelley, partly in response to what you were asking, I mean, the thing for me that makes this be really important about restoring the negative factor and not allocating it to a specific fund is that it puts the control back to local school boards. And so our board could make a decision. If we had the additional funds, I mean, we've been cut, and we've had programs cut, and so we could decide if the money came to BVSD where we wanted it to be allocated. So it's real clear in my mind that one of the values of this is that it's about local control, not about being told from the state legislature about what we ought to be doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about this issue. I went to the CASB retreat 2 weekends ago, and one of the things we talked about was this negative factor. And there was a decision by the board of directors of CASB that we would focus on one primary legislative effort this year, and that would be to restore the funding. And it's very close to what you said, Bruce. There may be some question about how much the negative factor is worth. I mean, I heard you say, I think $1.2 billion. Here, I think the talk there was $1 billion, but whatever it is, it's a lot of money, and our portion of that is significant. And we have made a lot of cuts in this regard. So I have a request that I wanted to make, and it was to really think carefully from Boulder Valley's perspective what we've lost as a result of these cuts. We've received a portion of the cuts, our percentage. What have we lost? And so that's something I would like to ask for is what are we doing without now because of the cuts? And I mean, it's a little complicated for Boulder Valley because of our mill levy and because we have been able to backfill some of the cuts with local dollars. But the local dollars should have come on top of what the state was funding, not being used to backfill the money. And so our situation may not be quite as dire as those of all other districts in the state, but it has affected us. And so I'd like to know what's happened in Boulder Valley, what's been the impact of the cuts, and what are the things that we might not be doing, that we're not doing now, that we could be doing if we had more funds, including the state funding as well as the mill levy override money. So that's what I'd like to ask for. And I'm also interested in trying to think about how to get our public involved. I think people are really confused about the words negative factor. I mean, what does that mean? And I know it's a terrible word. And so how can we talk to our public about what exactly has happened? I think we talk about cuts, we talk about cutting programs, we talk about increasing class size, we talk about those things, but I think it would be good for us to begin to think about a new way of the language so that people know what has happened with us. So I want to work with the superintendents and the CEA and our board and the CASB board to try to think about this. It's a very serious problem, and unless our communities and school boards and superintendents speak up and ask for this money and be forceful in arguing for it, I fear we won't get it. And I fear our children and their education will suffer. So that's what I'd like to ask for. And I have another topic, another issue on this matter. I have a copy here in front of me that I'm going to read, and I'm going to ask that we send it to agenda setting to consider putting it on the agenda for our next board meeting. But it's a resolution on the negative factor, and I just want you to think about it, and I will send it out to you, and I apologize for not having it in advance. But it's similar to the information, I think, Bruce, that you sent, and I'm going to read it. It's short. In order to ensure resources for quality K-12 education in our state, CASB calls upon the Colorado General Assembly to honor the intent and language of Amendment 23 by making its highest priority of immediately eliminating the negative factor in K-12 education funding and restoring funds lost to its use, the use of the negative factor to date. We call upon the legislature to embrace their commitment to education in Colorado and restore those lost funds within the next 5 years. So I'm going to ask to bring that resolution before this board for the next meeting. And again, I apologize for not having it in front of you. I know how annoying I am when people do that. but how annoyed I am. But anyway, I will send it, and I would like to send it to agenda setting and see if we would like to consider a resolution to this effect. I think it's real important for school boards to get on board. So, anybody have any other comments, Jenny, on this topic?
On this
Yeah,
topic, yeah.
thanks.
So CASB has also put out, as you know, I'm represent our board on the Legislative Resolutions Committee, and we also discussed this, the focus that the Board of Directors has directed CASB to take on restoring the negative factor. And so if it's helpful to people, and they've sent out this individualized lobbying plan, ILP, for boards to kind of take a look at as they discuss the resolution they've asked for that would help us as a board plan our lobbying efforts individually or as a board. So I don't know if other people have seen this or not. I'll be happy to, I've got a link to it. I'll be happy to send it around, but it's also, Lori, and we can talk about this in agenda setting as well. It also has some questions and things to guide our discussion as a board about how we want to proceed forward, so be a good,
Okay.
be a good agenda thing.
Good.
And just by the way, I would support adopting a resolution to focus on restoring the negative factor, because every school district, I mean, I think it's important for the legislature to remember, and for us to remember that we didn't get very much guidance from the legislature on how to make cuts, so every school district has made a different set of cuts. So then as money is restored, it kind of needs to go out individually so that school districts who were in different places and made different decisions can also make different, can plan accordingly as new money comes in.
Great, thanks. Tom?
So I was remembering back to some of the cuts we made after you made the comment there, Lori, and I think if we dig back in some of our notes, we'll see those. But one of the things we did was increase class sizes, and that never was restored, at least not fully. We restored partly at one time. So there are a number of things that we did like that, as well as tightening, overall tightening of the belt. We reduced a lot of staff at the Ed Center, for example, a number of things. So I think those would be very good for us to have to put our fingers on. We can probably go back. Leslie, you can probably find a lot of those from those work sessions when we did those. The other thing I would add to consider for this resolution would be restoring the negative factor without two things, without any strings attached to it, just like you were mentioning, because that doesn't help you if it's money diverted elsewhere instead of restoring what you did, right? Just like you said, so that's a good thing. And the other is that it come along with there'd be no unfunded mandates that come along with it. And that's my fear, that not only will it be directed in one direction, but then we'll say, oh, go do this as well, and that goes unfunded. So that could totally wash out the effects of being able to restore funding if those things come along with it.
Well, great, thanks. I'll work to include those ideas. I think they're good ideas. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Bruce on his presentation? Thanks. Jenny? Uh-huh.
On a different topic, right? That's okay? No?
For Bruce?
Yeah, for Bruce. So, yes, so the professional development, I just want to comment and say I'm glad we're doing that. And this isn't exactly a question, but it is sort of, I just wonder if, I noticed that one of the comments we got back when we did our presentation at CASB earlier this year was, wow, that sounds great, but we as a school district can't afford to bring in an outside consultant to do this work. And it occurs to me, if we're training people to take this work in our own district, that at some point we might be able to share it with other districts. We might have people who could kind of share the work we're doing in a more hands-on way with other districts as well. And I don't know if you thought about that or not.
So I would just say from my work in Montana on this, doing this similar work, is that over time, as we built capacity, we were able to do just that, and that some of our neighboring districts, sometimes it was just a helping hand, sometimes it was fee-based, and so we were able to do some of that to both build capacity and also develop skills. So I think that's very, very reasonable.
Good. Thanks. Okay, our next item of business is student communication, and we have no students here today, and public hearing, public participation, we have no one at this point signed up to address the board, so the next item of business will be the board communication. Shelley, thank you.
Jenny and I attended a day-long session of the 10 Teacher Principal Effectiveness Committee this week, and I just wanted to update you on their progress. As you might recall, this whole evaluation system needs to go into effect beginning next year, the 2014-15 school year. So the district's been busy rolling out the first half of that, which is the professional practices portion, which is basically, what can be observed in the classroom and supported by different artifacts. And that has, already entered the test mode, and I think there's been like 50 trainings already, something like that, of principals and teachers, and it appears to be going well. I understand there's been good conversations, and people are taking it very seriously, and a lot of good feedback about having a structure where they can have meaningful conversations about evaluations. So that's been good. So the next step then is to iron out the 50% growth piece, which is more difficult because, of course, it's impossible to hold a teacher accountable for their contribution to a student's growth on anything, I think. Nonetheless, the district is forging ahead to meet the state's requirement, and I think they're on a good path. And that path is basically asking teachers how they want to be evaluated in the context of that 50% growth. So they have a couple prototypes that they brought forward. One is from middle school science, where the science teachers are saying, let us divide up that growth score so that 20% of our score will be on like a common assessment, like the 8th grade science TCAP, and 20% will be on a school-wide assessment, like whatever science, 8th grade science test they have within the school. And 60% will be on the individual. The teacher will determine how they want that other 60%. This is just one example. So, for example, if a science teacher wanted to give a scientific writing assessment at the beginning of the year and give the same one at the end of the year, then they would measure their growth on that, and they would include that as part of their growth score. So the thing I like about the way it's going is that there's a lot of input from the teachers, and therefore there will be a lot of buy-in when it comes time to do this. I think a question for the board is whether we feel like there are some things that absolutely should be included in this growth score that maybe are not being considered by every teacher. So, for example, like student perception surveys or parent perception, or like we need to at some point decide if that's important to us in addition to what the teachers and principals are saying they would like. And I think we can probably work that out. It looks like it's all going very well. And I just think we ought to start thinking about that, whether we want something like that included. I think next month we're getting a full report from the committee, so there'll be a lot more detail. But if anybody has any questions, Jenny and I might be able to answer them, about that. And the other thing is, next week I am attending a meeting in Washington, D.C. of the National School Board Association, and we will be we'll be visiting with our congresspeople to discuss our recommendations about things like local control, unfunded mandates, SPED funding, and I think more flexibility around ELL and SPED testing. Those are probably the 3 or 4 main issues. And I will be also personally recommending that the Department of Education play a different role, less of a policy-making role and more of a support and research role for states. And I encourage you to let me know if there's anything you would like me to take to our congressman. We will be meeting with Udall, Bennett, Polis, and various other congressmen representing the state of Colorado.
Well, Shelley, I'd like to respond to that, because I do have a thought. We have a delegation of congressmen, maybe not all of them, but I think maybe Bennett and Polis, who are absolutely in love with charters. And
I think that's also on the topic was that they be measured the same way that other schools are being measured.
Well, yes, and I mean, just some realization that we're not anytime soon going to, I mean, charters are never going to educate more than a fairly small percentage of our students. So while I think we have wonderful charters in our district, and I'm really proud of our relationship with them, the push to create more charters rather than to actually support and improve our neighborhood schools, which is after all where most of our students will end up, strikes me as a little counterproductive.
I wish I were going. Sounds like a good trip. It's always fun to be in DC and be talking about education issues, but thank you for going and representing both BVSD and state. It's important for them to know that we're paying attention. Unfunded mandates, I mean, as Tom said earlier, I mean, that's part of it comes from the state, the feds. So, yeah, good, thanks. Anyone else have any board communication to talk about? Tom, Jenny?
I actually
Jenny?
do a little bit. So, just to mention that you and Tina and I all attended the Colorado School Finance Project, where they had a really interesting presentation on, from somebody that works for the legislature's staff, on bipartisan staff. The chief economist of the Colorado Legislative Council, which is bipartisan, and she presented on the economic outlook for the state of Colorado. And again, Bruce, she did leave me at that, wondering at the end of it why it is that we're not seeing more funding for public education. The answer seemed to be that they couldn't guarantee that there would always be that much money in the budget, which I don't get it, but anyway, I think it gives us a place to start lobbying from. So anyway, and then I attended all right after that CASB's Legislative Resolution Committee meeting, and you're right, Lori. The focus is on reducing the negative factors. So as a committee, we operate, of course, within the parameters that the board of directors has set for CASB, but within that, we directed or urged Jane to oppose a number of bills that would have siphoned money off, and it was really painful for me to say, yes, we shouldn't be putting more money into talented and gifted education until we reduce the negative factor. I want you to know that hurt, but I see the point, so I'm willing to say yes, restore the negative factor first, although I hope we'll work on talented and gifted here in our own district very soon. And so, and there have been a number of opportunities. One of the things that we've taken away is there have been some attempts at the state legislative level to bring back little pieces of 213, which didn't go into effect because 66 didn't pass, but there are some things that people still found attractive and are trying to sort of push in the back door. And again, my hope is that none of that will happen if there's no funding to support it, because almost everything that happened in 213 requires money. And then I think later on, we're going to talk about agenda setting. We can talk about.
Testing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I have one thing to report. I went to the CASB retreat, as I said earlier, and I will be again on the executive committee, which I'm looking forward to. So that'll be fun to, if you have thoughts about what CASB ought to be doing, let me know. And secondly, to invite board members to attend the Winter Legislative Conference on Thursday and Friday, February 20th and 21st. If you can, it's a lot of fun. Sandy sent out some registration materials, but we'll have that conference. Let's see, the next item on our agenda.
Can I?
Sure, please.
So I don't know who else is attending the legislative conference, but I think several of us are. And one of the things CASB likes people to do is to contact their legislators beforehand to tell them that we're going to be down at the Capitol, because it is an opportunity, particularly on Friday morning, to go down and pull your legislator off the floor or meet with them. And so I think that if you're going, it's probably smart to let whoever your personal, or actually anybody from our delegation in Boulder Valley, I think is fair game, but particularly if you've got.
So Jenny, can we contact you if we're going, and maybe you can help set up those meetings? Let them know. I can help you work on that, too.
Yes, and I bet Briggs would help us too,
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
you, Briggs?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Briggs. There he is. Okay. All right. So if you're going to go, just let's keep talking. So we know who's going to be there and see if we can work with our legislators. Okay? All right. And the next item on our agenda is action items, a consent grouping, and I will read them. Personnel items, approval of minutes, January 14th regular meeting, approval of minutes, January 21st, 2014 special meeting, acceptance of donation Cole Elementary, acceptance of donation Mesa Elementary, grant through the Deputy Superintendent, bullying prevention through the Colorado Department of Human Services, TGYS 14, a grant in curriculum and instruction for ninth grade physical science course in connection with CU Boulder and the National Science Foundation, DRK 12-14. Do I have a motion to approve? Jenny, is there a second? Jim? Is there any items that you would like to have pulled? Do we have any discussion or any questions? Tina?
Can I just make a comment about?
Please.
Yeah. I had sent out some questions about the bullying prevention piece, and I think one thing, and I just wanted to comment a little bit more, that I think it will help a lot in the strategic planning sessions to kind of clearly set out some of the social and emotional goals and what are the programs and the process for evaluating the programs. A lot of what I'm understanding about some social emotional programs is that they should be research and evidence-based to a high level. And I'd like to be able to see some of that in the strategic plan. And I didn't see a working group that specifically addressed it, but I see some areas where it might fall under, but at some point if it could be clarified where that will be. So, and that would help just flesh out a little bit, like grants like this that are given to programs, so it doesn't seem just kind of, it's not that it's arbitrary, but so that it fits into a grander scheme of how we're getting social and emotional programs that are really directly tied to student success. And so in this case, it just wasn't clear what the problem was that we were trying to solve in this particular with this particular program. And I know it's bullying, but since it wasn't coming from a specific school as a request, or there wasn't a specific metric tied to the schools where it's going, it was difficult to understand that. And it was also a little bit tricky to tell because it doesn't have enough research behind it to qualify or be listed on some of the websites that do a lot of this evaluation. It wasn't clear why this program was chosen, and since it is a 3-year investment of teacher time and professional development, those were my concerns where they were stemming from. So, so I think, obviously it's fine, and, I trust that the staff has thought about this deeply and compared it to, Steps to Respect and Orwelius and those other programs that you see kind of repeatedly in these kinds of evaluations. So I'm assuming this is the best that we can do, and I really look forward to seeing a 50% drop in bullying at the targeted schools, and then seeing just more information in the strategic plan as it becomes available.
It's okay? All right? Great. Jenny?
So, and the other thing is, Tina, you had some really good questions, and I thought the answers were really interesting. And and what I regret is that I think it was good for you to send the questions out ahead of time so that you could be prepared to answer them. But I do regret that that's not in our public record because it's not part of our board discussion. So I'm wondering, and it's not actually, I'm not exactly sure with the new board docs where it would end up anyway, but it's not exactly in an RFI for public consumption. So I'm just wondering how we could have that information that you put together for us available should anybody, the answers you came up with, should anybody be curious about that?
So our format in the past has been to do it in our Friday communique. So we certainly could reformat that and push it to you, and then that's posted on the website. We're still working a little bit with board docs, I think exactly what that will be in the new format, but we have record of all those we've done before. We certainly could do the same and put it in the context of this application so that the reader would know why the questions were asked and how it fits. So we certainly could do that, Jenny. I mean, it's, yeah, so we can follow up with that.
I think we should.
Absolutely.
Shirley?
Are you saying that in the past, when a board member is asked a question, that's the answers, the question and the answers have been documented somewhere? Because I wasn't aware of that.
So when they go through the format of a request for information, the RFI format, or sometimes we have dialogue or we compile information that doesn't necessarily go through the RFI, but I communicate it back out to you in the Friday correspondence, and that's public record. And so what we've done, not always, but recently, is that we've captured that on the website, then, because part of it is we want it to be searchable. So not just public review, but sometime later, we say, I think we discussed this once before, and so that, and also the public can do that. So that's part of what we're trying to, work with the board docs format so that it, once it's in, that it's available to the public and it's searchable and, becomes archived. So, but yes, we have done that. And those are those Friday communiques that we've done. Because the media's also asked that as we communicate that to the board, that it be made public information so others can read it as well. So probably not everything, Shelley, but many things we do in that format.
Okay. Any further discussion with
If I
Tom?
might just, obviously
Bruce?
on items that are not confidential, so I guess I should just say that, which I know you know that. But, so more of the general information kinds of things like these questions.
Okay.
I have a question on the two grants. When it talks about teacher release time, like for subs and so on, is that cost included in the grant dollars, or is that additional costs outside of the grant dollars for both of these two?
So there's no match on the bullying program, so that cost would be included in the grant. And Ron, I don't know if you're familiar with the science one. I can pull it up and look at it. If there's a match on that.
Yeah, they don't say it's a match on
There's
the
not a
form here,
match,
but it does say, that subs for teacher release time will be necessary.
So I think the question, Ron, is on the National Science Foundation grant, whether there will be cost incurred by the district for substitutes to release teachers to participate, or if the cost for the substitute teachers are incorporated in the grant award.
So the costs are incorporated in the grant award for stipends for release time and the like. So really, the only additional cost to the district would be the monitoring of it that's provided by staff, but that would be Sam Messier. But other than that, it's pretty self-sufficient there.
Nice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ron.
Any other questions? Sandy, we call the roll.
Albright.
Yes.
Belleville.
Yes.
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 Thank you. Our next item of discussion will be, are there any items that people would like the agenda setting committee, to consider?
Yes.
Jenny?
So, was it last week or the week before, I noticed that Douglas County passed a resolution that would request a state waiver from standardized testing under certain conditions. And that really interests me, and I'd like to talk about our board doing something similar, because I think that in many cases, we're not getting much benefit from a lot of the state testing we're doing, and some of the state testing that's coming up the park really concerns me a lot. So it's not delivering us much benefit, or as much benefit as it could, and it takes away from education. I think it's doing our students a disservice, so I'd like to get that on the agenda sooner rather than later, especially if there's going to be legislation introduced around it, which I think there may be.
Okay, any discussion on that? I've had some similar ideas about that, and let me just say what they are. I think it would be really useful for us to take a look at what's happened in BVSD with regard to testing. What tests did our kids take 5 years ago? What are they taking today? What do we think the future will bring if we follow, when we implement all of these mandates? What does it mean to a student? What does it mean to a family? Those are softer kinds of qualitative questions, but they have a big impact. What does it mean to a student and a parent and a teacher and a school and a district? So I'd like some background information about the testing program and what the experience has been and what's being proposed. I'm worried about it. I'm also very worried about the PARCC assessments as I read about what's happened across the country, both financially and what it means for children and teachers. But I just think we need to have a handle on where we are today. So that's what I'd like some information on. I know it'll take a while to pull that together, but I think it would be something important for us to discuss as a board, is what is happening in our schools and how are the tests being implemented and what's it mean for a student. You know, I think back to my own kids' experience, and they took a lot of tests. And we spend a lot of time testing rather than being in a learning environment. So it's a kind of nebulous, but I'm sure you, how's that sound? Do you understand what I'm looking for?
So I talked to Jonathan Dings, Dr. Dings, this afternoon. So what's pretty doable is for us to kind of give a snapshot or a landscape view of where this will be in a year or so. I mean, we're sort of in transition right now as a state, not just as a district. So the state requirements, the measuring academic success requirements for Colorado, the CMAS, they call it. So that'll be reading, language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. So we know where that'll be administered, what grades and all that. So that we can compile that just so you can look at one view. And then we also know, because of other related legislation, some early admission, early entrance assessments, the READ Act, our funding for ELL. So that, it isn't all in one place always. But Jonathan had prepared some work for the educator effectiveness work group that sort of framed, as we look around the teacher piece that Shelley addressed earlier, what does that landscape look like and what do we know is coming? And so we can pretty readily pull that together.
Okay.
We'll do that. I think there's value of that just where we have a better understanding, but also as we communicate to parents and staff and students of what that looks like going forward. And so we are doing that. We'll be glad to do that. And so as we work in agenda setting, maybe we can talk about the best way to bring that forward, and maybe that's even a work session at some point so we can have further discussion. I think there will be, it appears there will be legislation in this session that looks at two things, it seems. One would be what Douglas County has been working on, and that is, with others, is that to give districts the ability to make a request to do a different assessment versus the one that's sort of prescribed by the state. The legislation I've seen proposed is not every assessment, but so some would stay in place, like maybe end of elementary, end of middle school, end of high school. So there would be some common comparison across districts. But if they feel, we feel, anybody feels, any district feels that their district-developed assessment better addresses the goals they've set, that they could make an appeal, a request that they could supplant or use theirs instead, so they weren't double testing. I think that's a concern we've discussed at this table before is, if we do ours and also we do the states, then gosh, it'll even be more. So that's some of the drive there. Then I also think there's some interest in discussing at the legislative level, what if we just did less? I mean, do we really need to do this much? How much are we being federally required to do? How much of this have we done to ourselves through our state accountability measures? And so I think that'll be an active conversation in this session as well. So I think the better prepared we are knowing what we are planning to do, what we are doing, then at least we'll be better informed to participate in that discussion. My guess is it won't all be resolved in this session either. So, but I certainly think it'll start in this session. And maybe at the State Board of Education level as well.
Great. Thank you. Shelley?
What about the historical perspective that Lori's asking for? Is that possible? Because I think that might be very instructive.
So in conversation with Jonathan, I think he's done some legwork on this. I think it's also looking at what CDE just has as readily available in record. And then, some of what we may have done that's unique to our district that either we're still doing or we're not doing anymore. So, yeah, we'll look at that. It probably isn't as available or immediately as accurate as what we can do looking forward, because we just have a lot more data on that. But we'll wade into that, Shelley, and see what we can do as a point of reference at least.
Okay. Thanks. Anything else on this agenda setting? Tom?
From our last meeting in December, there were 3 items. I just want to check on the status of those. One was the board meeting structure and discussions involved around whether we should change some venues. Sometimes high schools was suggested, for example, to get out and engage the public a little more. Second item was the special education follow-up. And the third item was policy review by board subcommittee. Just wanted to see understand the status on those, if those are coming up. If not, consider those.
I think we've discussed them all in the agenda setting committee, and they're all still on the list. Is that
Just on
correct?
my list, yes.
So they haven't been scheduled.
That's correct.
No, but we're meeting on next week, so we'll have an update on that.
And anybody is welcome to that meeting, should they
Mhm.
wish to pop in.
But thank you for those reminders. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. And there's one more thing I'd like to add to that list, and that is student involvement. I just would like a little feedback or follow-up on, we don't have our students here. We've got that table out there, but no students. So maybe we should just think about what we're doing, and if they're not coming, we could maybe take them off the agenda, but I'd really rather have them be here. So let's follow up and talk about it, maybe at agenda setting. Okay, anything else for agenda setting discussion? Okay. I would like to clarify on the record that the Board of Education has issues to discuss in executive session as follows. Personnel matters is permitted by CRS 24-6-4024F. The particular matter is the superintendent evaluation and mid-year update. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? Jenny, is there a second? Shelley? Sandy, will you please call the roll on the motion to convene into executive session? Yes.
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 Great, thank you. The board will now take a brief recess to move into the superintendent's conference room for executive session. And I'd like to thank our audience for being here with us today. Thank you, and members of the cabinet. It's great to have you here. Thank you for coming. Meeting's adjourned.